Thank you so much, John. Good morning, and again, welcome to the Fall 2020 Georgia State University Nonprofit Leadership Alliance mini-conference. The theme of today's conference is how to thrive in a multi-generational workplace. As John mentioned, I am Aisha Adkins, second-year Master of Public Administration student at the Andrew Young School. Before we get started, I'd just like to remind folks to turn off your microphone and camera if you have not already done so. Thank you. As he also mentioned, I am an NLA Executive Board member, and I am currently working as a graduate research assistant for Faith Village's dementia caregiving research backed by the NIH, an organizing and legislative analysis intern with a national policy nonprofit caring across generations, and a dementia caregiving and health equity advocate through our Turn to Care. I'm also a full-time caregiver for my mother. Now that you know a little bit about me, allow me to tell you more about the Nonprofit Leadership Alliance. NLA exists to strengthen the leadership of the social sector and sustain the ability of nonprofits to fulfill their missions with a talented and prepared workforce. The Georgia State chapter accomplishes these goals through facilitating networking opportunities, engaging in local community service, and guiding students as they earn their certified nonprofit professional credentials. The Georgia State University chapter of the Nonprofit Leadership Alliance would like to thank our sponsor and key supporter, State Farm, our nonprofit professionals, and our panelists for making this event possible. I will now return the virtual mic to John O'Kane, GSU NLA faculty advisor and nonprofit studies professor, who will introduce our guests for today's program. John?
Thank you, Aisha. And let me just say what a wonderful representative Aisha Atkins is of our undergraduate and graduate students who are pursuing careers in the nonprofit sector. We wonder when she has time to breathe when you heard of all the activities she's involved in, plus, of course, being involved with the Nonprofit Leadership Alliance, which is an extracurricular activity. I want to echo my thanks to State Farm, who has been a supporter of the Nonprofit Leadership Alliance for several years, and in general for the support of Georgia State University, particularly on our Decatur campus. And I know we have a number of students from our Decatur campus joining us. So happy to have you join us and hope you will be considering a career in the nonprofit sector as you look at moving on from the Decatur campus to pursue your studies and your career. I believe with that, I am going to introduce Nancy That's tough. Vapraskas, and Nancy is our presenter. I'm very pleased. Nancy is a part-time instructor at Georgia State University. She actually teaches our human resources classes, so how appropriate to have her present. She has a career of over 25 years in the human resources field, and is a former president and chair of the Atlanta chapter of the Society for Human Resource Management. Her areas of specialty besides human resources include leadership development, employee engagement, culture building. She has an MS from Florida State University and an MBA from Mercer University, and several certifications. Now she is focusing her attention on her human resource consulting and leadership coaching practice. I believe what I'll do, Nancy, is just go ahead and let you get started, and then let me mention, let me go ahead and introduce the panel so we can just jump right into that. We are so fortunate to have three folks who will be responding to Nancy's presentation. I want to introduce first Elaine Armstrong, who is the VP for Marketing at Goodwill of North Georgia, where she's been since 2006. When she joined Goodwill in 2006, she was the public relations manager and the agency's primary spokesperson, which is probably what led to her hosting Sundays at noon, the Good Works radio show that Goodwill does. And you may have heard her if you've listened in, and if you haven't, I certainly encourage you to do so. Elaine has a degree from the University of Georgia Grady College of Journalism and Mass Communication. Annette Jackson, and Elaine is sort of our nonprofit responder. For our for-profit responder, we have Annette Jackson. Annette is the talent acquisition manager for State Farm in Atlanta. She has been with State Farm 35 years in 7 different locations, and 30 of those 35 years have been in human resources. Her focus is on employee relations, talent management, human resources consulting, compensation, and workforce solution. He is a James Madison University graduate and has certificates as a charter property casualty underwriter and a senior professional in human resources. And last but not least is Ben Bradbury, who is a recent graduate, spring of 2020, from Georgia State University. He earned his MPA, his Master's in Public Administration, with a concentration in nonprofit management. We refer to Ben and all those who graduated in the spring as our COVID grads. So we are happy to have you. Consider this an additional thanks for your degree, because you didn't quite have the same send-off that we would normally give students, Ben. Ben was honored as an Amanda G. Hyatt Fellowship recipient. He also was active in the Nonprofit Leadership Alliance, where he served on the executive board and earned his CNP, Certified Nonprofit Professional status. He currently serves as a research intern with Habitat for Humanity International. So with that, let me turn this over to Nancy, who is going to do our main presentation, and then we will hear from our panel. As you think of questions, folks, please enter them in the chat, and we hope to have a good half hour or more to respond to your questions. I'm pleased to say we have an equal number of nonprofit professionals and students, so hopefully that will lead to a very good interaction. Nancy, take it away.
Thank you, John. Let me start by saying I'm very excited to be here. John and I first began to talk about having this presentation on multi-generational workforces when the economy was thriving and we didn't even know an expression like COVID existed. And certainly we have been in the throes of big and major changes, but guess what? That's what working in leadership, and certainly folks who are connected on the human resources side of things, and we're all, if we're leaders, connected on the human resources side of things, get to deal with. As John said, I am the president and founder of a company called P2 Excellence. The 2 P's stand for people and performance. And Ben, who was one of my students, will tell you what I strive to do in the classroom and in my work is to make sure that all of us are prepared to come to work bringing our very best selves and work in an environment that allows us to be our very best selves so that organizations can thrive. I'm really interested in the multi-generational workforce work that's being done. I think you will find it highly applicable to other things that are different and the same about us as we go along. Anyway, we'll get started with the slides now. Amber's going to be the host. And again, our goal will be to thrive in the workforce arena. Okay, Amber, so I don't see the slides. That's interesting. Here we go.
Hey.
There, I had a minute where I was really nervous there. Okay, so there we go. Great. I was like, that'll be interesting to do the presentation, kind of guessing where the slides are. Okay, so again, we're going to look at thriving in a multi-generational workforce. And if you flip it over, Amber, we'll see the first chart. Obviously, the workforce composition is changing. It is in every generation changing. A few years ago, we had traditionalists in the workforce, and we started what now seems to be a norm of having 4 workforce generations in the workplace at the same time. If you'll look at the bottom of this chart, you'll see that in 2020, the Gen Zs are just coming in with those brown lines. And the biggest group of people is the Gen Y, or the millennials, as we call them. In 2015, millennials took over as having the largest representation in the workplace. And then you'll see, as we begin to move forward, there'll be a time when boomers will move out of the workplace, and we'll figure out what the next set of letters are that we're doing. What we want to pay attention to here is this is the reality of the workplace that we're in. And while people say, well, just get used to it and go to work, it's not quite that easy. So Amber, next slide. This chart gives you a little bit of just background about who we are in the generations. So again, we all had different formative experiences, and it's important that we pay attention to those things in each generation that helped frame the group that you are dealing with. So boomers, of course, were part of the Vietnam War, civil rights. We're famous for Woodstock. We were the first ones to really have television sets as we were growing up as children. Our stereotype is that we're workaholics and we're very money focused, and we have an aspiration for a job or retirement security. Gen X's came along next. They were part of the fall of the Berlin Wall and all that meant in terms of changes from the World War II era. They were the first to have PCs, and they were known as latchkey kids. Personal computers came in during that, their generation. They're known to be independent, skeptical, focused on results. Their stereotype is that they're self-centered and cynical. Their aspiration is to have work-life balance. Millennials were next. They experienced 9/11, and they were the first to dive into social media. Smartphones are their signature product. Their descriptor is confident. They want immediate results. They're interested in community service. Their stereotype is that they overestimate their own ability and they job hop. Their aspiration is freedom and flexibility. Gen Zs came forward in the economic crisis. Gay marriage became a norm. School shootings also became a norm. And now COVID-19 is becoming a norm. Their signature product is 3D printing. Their descriptors are they're tech savvy. They like meaningful work. They feel less entitled than some of the generations before them. Their stereotype is that they're constantly connected and they're multitaskers. Their aspiration is security and stability. Now, this slide was taken before COVID-19, and we made that addition. But what we want you to think, Amber, if you'll move just to the next slide, is that the pandemic has really emphasized, brought into sharper focus every one of the differences in each one of these generations, because we have so much that we're trying to react to. Next slide, Amber. So we've included a new slide that talks about how well the different generations are coping with the impact of COVID-19. Now, obviously, your baby boomers are the most likely to be negatively physically impacted by COVID-19, but the studies are showing they are the generation that is actually coping overall with the experience of COVID-19 better than the other generations. This may be because boomers are nearing retirement, look at work a little bit differently, have lifetime experiences that may change the way they look at things. What's interesting, of course, it's not surprising that Gen Zs are the ones that are most affected economically. The youngest generation always takes the biggest hit in the downturn of an economy because they're the newest into the workforce and the most likely to be in service jobs that don't pay quite as well to begin with. Unfortunately, the very first 10 years, or I should say, unfortunately, given today's economic experiences, the first 10 years is critical to how well you will do in the labor market in terms of promotions, in terms of early savings, paying off your student loans, things like that. And so just like we saw in 2008, this COVID generation is likely going to experience some milestones that they have to postpone in order to catch up economically. What the studies are also showing us is that Gen Zs and millennials are having the most difficulty from a mental health standpoint during this COVID time, and surprisingly are having difficulty in the constant remote work environment. I say surprisingly because I think all of us who were in the Gen X or Boomer generation thought, well, the tech-savvy younger generations will have an easy time of it. And while it is true that it's easier on the technology side, it is not true on the separation from your coworker side. So many Gen Zs and millennials who were arguing for work from home policies before COVID are now recognizing that perhaps what they really meant was a day or two away from the office. They're more anxious to get back into the office. Boomers, on the other hand, are thinking they may well have made a permanent change. So let's move on to the next slide. Here, what I want to spend a few minutes on is looking at the challenges that come up in a multi-generational workforce. From there, we'll begin to look then what our strategies are for making this a really strong asset. First of all, of course, we want to be aware of the negative stereotypes. And you'll remember I reviewed those on an earlier slide. We are concerned that boomers can't use tech. We're concerned that boomers are more prejudiced than the younger generations. We're concerned that Xers just want to get ahead. Millennials are lazy and Gen Zs lack interpersonal skills. Because we grab a hold of those negative stereotypes, and because, quite frankly, we are more likely to think it's okay to say multi-generational stereotypes out loud, where we wouldn't necessarily say negative stereotypes out loud as they pertain to other things. We have blatant discounting that takes place in the workplace as well as discrimination. And we're more likely to shame on the generational side because, again, we think we can say it out loud. Unconscious bias occurs when there's multiple generations in the workplace, just like is true when you have other things that are happening. But you still have to work to overcome the bias. I think part of what happens in the multi-generational piece too is that we tend to get our stereotypes perhaps from the community that we're with. If our children are not making it, we may think that that fits their generation. If we think our parents aren't figuring out technology, then we may think that fits that whole generation as well. But what we want to do is begin to move through the negative stereotypes, recognize our unconscious bias, and also realize that we're going to come to work with a different kind of viewpoint based on the generation that we grew up in. Okay, so we have those stereotypes. Let's see what we can do on the positives. Next slide. Okay, so there are, of course, benefits to a multi-generational workforce, just like there is in any other kind of diversity. And what we're looking for here, just like we are in other kinds of diversity, is inclusion. We know that when we have people from different generations working on a problem, we do a much better job figuring out how to identify and define that problem. We figure out how to fix the problem faster. We have more innovation. We make better decisions. We have better employee engagement, lower turnover, and really critically important, even beyond the internal side, is we have a better understanding of what the marketplace actually wants from us. Diverse teams make decisions that are considered to be 87% stronger than decisions that are made by an individual. Next slide. So, what is it that we can do? We know that it's challenging being in a diverse workplace. We know that we have a lot of things to overcome, but whether we are a participant in the multi-generational workplace or whether or not we are a leader in that place, we have work that we can do. So I often say to the kids, grown-ups in my classes, that what we want to remember when we are leading a team of people is that the organization has particular work that it wants to make sure gets done. And your job as a participant and as a leader is to get focused on the shared objectives. So we aren't working to make the multi-generational workplace successful simply because it makes for a nice place to work. We're wanting to make it work because it's going to allow our company to thrive. And when our company thrives, then we as individuals and leaders in that workplace are also able to thrive. So what we want to do is get ourselves in the room focused on getting the results that we want, whether the room is in person or virtual. Everybody in the room wants to be appreciated and respected. Everybody in the room wants to learn and grow. Everybody in the room wants to have a positive work environment. So one of the places to pay attention to that is to take time to get to know each other as individuals and not just think about things in stereotypes. And I would suggest, and I'm sure that many of you would say exactly the same thing, is the way to do this is to really take time to get to know people, which means asking more questions about people's backgrounds, the way they work, the way they think, wanting to know how is it going to be easy for everybody in the team to participate. The other thing you want to do is to be able to flex your communication style. We all know that we come to work differently. And most of us are coming to work differently just in the COVID experience than we thought we would come to work previously. And so we want to take a little bit of time to check in as we begin to work together about how things are going and then move into the work. We want to make sure when we're setting goals and objectives that we understand how people like to be communicated with. We want to make sure we use all the communication tools that are at our disposal. For example, one of the stereotypes says that boomers would prefer to talk on the phone and Gen Zs would prefer to message, IM, message, or text. That may be true, but it may not always be true. And even if you are a person who likes to talk on the phone, you have to be prepared to use other communication styles. Even if you're a person who likes to text, there's many times those of us in HR will tell you to pick up the phone because voice tone makes a difference. Most of all, the biggest thing I want you to remember is to assume good intent. It's so easy for us in these challenging times to think somebody has a point of view or is doing something on purpose when we don't have any idea if that's true or not. So just going in thinking about, if I'm going to assume that the people on my team want the very best, just like I do, then we can get a lot farther down the road. I've included in the next slide a model that those of you who are experienced with coaching will be very familiar with. This is called the GROW model. And I think as you begin to do your work in a multi-generational workplace and begin to lead, again, either as an individual or the person who's technically has a leadership title, if you'll use this GROW model, it will help you be more successful. The first part of the GROW model is goal. What is it you're actually trying to accomplish? So think about coming into a team meeting, think about work you're trying to get done, think about a situation that you're trying to lower the tension on, where you think multi-generational work preferences is creating a difficulty. What is it you're actually trying to accomplish? And then the R stands for reality. What is the reality of the situation? So what's working, what's not working? Just take some time, expand your thinking, put yourself in different chairs around the room. Ask yourself, if I was sitting in another seat, would my reality of this be the same? Then begin to narrow down from that broader pipeline down to what options do I have? And then make a decision what it is that you'll do as that very first step forward. You can see how using this kind of model can help you as a leader in the multi-generational workplace. So let's go on to the next slide, where we're going to look at what we do if you are a leader of the multi-generational workplace. I think it's really important, and gosh, this is a situation where I wish we could just all be on the screen talking about it. But I think one of the things that we want to pay attention to here is so many leaders in today's workplace are carrying a full plate of their own portfolio of work. And so it's so easy for leadership to take a second step back because there is too much work to get done. I'm working with clients every day who are focused on their own personal task lists and have as one of their goals, fourth or fifth down their to-do list about helping other people on their team get better at their job. But if we're going to be successful working in a multi-generational workplace, then we're going to have to take time every day, every week, every month, thinking about what leadership skills are required from us. So again, one of the things you're going to want to do is look at cross-generational interaction. How are you going to put generations together with specific opportunities where they can be successful? Then you're going to want to, while you're accommodating the different needs of the group, you're going to want to be really clear about setting expectations and team norms. Those of us who are in human resources are really relying a lot these days on situational leadership and recognizing that we may have to back up in today's world to make sure expectations are very clear. It's often suggested that to make multi-generational workplaces work, it's a good place to leverage mutual mentoring. I find when I look at this expression, mutual mentoring, I'm not exactly sure if it's the word I would teach, that I would personally use, as opposed to perhaps co-learning. If you come from a different generation than I do, there's going to be certain things that are going to be easier for you to do than they would be for me to do. And the same is true vice versa. So we can learn from each other. Sometimes mentoring has a very positive connotation. Sometimes it feels like I'm a little bit less than in needing to learn from you, versus you have a skill set that I need to learn from you. Then we want to take those learning opportunities and use them as a benefit. We'll do that because we've learned to communicate. You know, those of us who have been in the workplace a long time will tell you communication comes up as one of the #1 issues, probably since Fred Flintstone was going around in his caves. But communication, anytime there is tough things going on, needs to increase. And again, I would recommend to you going back and looking at situational leadership, which will talk about the fact that if you're not getting the performance that you want, you need to be making sure that your communication is clear, including clarity in questions. You want to make sure that you're explaining to everybody often that learning opportunities are a benefit, not something to be discouraged. And then you want to up your feedback loop. The Gen Zs and millennials want a lot of feedback. Now, it's easy for us to suggest that boomers and Xers don't want a lot of feedback, but it may simply be, as you look at your teams, they want feedback that looks a little bit different, and it may simply be because they have worked in environments where there is little feedback, that they have just gotten to the point that they don't expect it. The last thing you want to do as a leader.
Your specialist, Curtis, is scheduled to complete a lawn service on Monday, October 26th.
Sorry about that. I have a phone that sometimes just talks by itself. The last thing you want to think about is, what is the most appealing rewards for the people on your team? Now I want to take just a few minutes, and the time that's left is to quickly move to tips if you are a model, here, that will begin to kind of put this in place as you're moving forward. This is called a workplace harmony model, and what it says is, first understand, then accommodate, then appreciate, then integrate. I think if you take a little bit of time, if we all take a little bit of time to understand the expectations of each generation, figure out what we can accommodate within the realm of the expectations of the business, appreciate that the differences make us better, and then integrate each generation's strengths, each individual's strengths, then we'll have a thriving workplace. Thanks for this opportunity, and I look forward to learning from the panel.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Maybe stop sharing screen and have panelists come up. That would be great. Any that you might have, please enter in the chat, and we'll monitor the. Have a chance, hopefully, to get all the questions. I want to start first, as we mentioned before, Elaine Armstrong is the VP of marketing with Goodwill, and she represents sort of our nonprofit perspective on this. And I confirmed with Elaine before we started today that Goodwill of North Georgia is actually the largest employer in the nonprofit sector in the state of Georgia. So Elaine, thank you again so much for being with us. I know you have a very full plate at this time in your life, and we so appreciate you taking the time to be with us today.
Absolutely. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I really respect and have enjoyed my time with the Nonprofit Leadership Alliance at Georgia State. It's been great. I enjoyed the presentation. Nancy, thank you for walking that through. You know, a lot of things resonated with what Nancy said. I thought, you know, definitely in terms of thinking through, which was kind of surprising at first, but made sense when Nancy broke it down about boomers and how boomers, particularly in the workplace, were coping a little bit more, a little better than some of the other generations. But really kind of, I thought too, harkens back to their work style with being a little bit more independent, and particularly for our younger employees, being more collaborative. And so even though the technology is there, they're so used to, you know, having a phone in hand or, you know, logging on to things, and it's been, you know, common nature for them for a long time. But really that collaboration, that participation, you know, bouncing ideas off of each other. When you think places that we have today and how they're set up now for collaboration. They're set up for small rooms where you can go and just have a quick meeting or a stand-up meeting. You know, my area and my department is like that. And, you know, when we were in the office, we would do that quite often with the marketing team, is just kind of stand around and have an impromptu meeting. And that isn't the same sort of work style that we have today with this, Zoom culture that we have. So that definitely resonated as she was going through that. So yeah, it definitely, I think some things were so poignant to what I am seeing in the workplace today. The communication piece, I can totally identify with. My background is in marketing and communications, so I can definitely point to the fact that multiple ways of communication, constant communication, and a communication about the things that people are really going to find beneficial right now. So information about benefits. You're talking about mental health and well-being. That's some of the things that that have been really resonating with our internal audience. Internal communications for any organization has been really key. We've ramped up a lot of our internal communications at Goodwill. I know I have a colleague of mine here on the webinar today, and he can probably attest that we have, since the start of COVID and really even prior to sort of closure and everything else, we ramped up our internal communications, messaging, probably at least tenfold in terms of just reminders about keeping yourself safe, washing hands, mental health reminders about benefits. We just went through open enrollment, so there was a double down on ensuring that people got a hold of their benefits and made sure that they checked all of those things because we're in a health crisis. And so I think that was some of the things that we wanted to do. And then the other things that have been resonating with our employee base are strategy and health of the organization. There's a lot of information and news that's going on around industries that are going under and companies that are folding. And so employees want to know. They want to know about the health of the organization, whether they are right at that time where they're going to retire and whether the retirement benefits are going to be available, or whether they're a younger employee and say, wow, I just started here. Am I going to have a job tomorrow? And so that has been so important in terms of communication for those three things, for benefits, for strategy, and organizational health, I think has been key.
Call on Ben. Environment.
Thanks, John. Nancy, thank you so much for your presentation. I almost expected you to keep going beyond your allotted 20 minutes because I feel like I'm back in spring semester where we had, our 2+ hour classes together. So
is it the back or the front of the building? Yeah. Okay.
I think somebody's off mute. So if you could mute yourself, I hear some geese in the background.
Yeah, I don't mind. Okay.
I think that's become one of the favorite expressions of the season. If you would please mute yourself.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. Interesting times for sure. But yeah, thank you, Nancy. It gave me some really good pieces to kind of reflect on, both professionally and personally. I do want to just point out that I really resonated with your point about millennials and Gen Zers, despite being adept with technology, having a really hard time with the constant remote work. And for me, that has definitely been the case. For those of you that are thinking about pursuing your MPA, you will likely have Nancy for Nonprofit Human Resources. And one of the tools that she provided us with in that class was the predictive index, which is, in a simplified description, kind of a career strength assessment tool. And for me, I'm a collaborator. It came as no surprise. I love to work in small teams. I love to see people at work. I love to bounce ideas off people, both formally and informally. And despite being fairly adept with Microsoft Teams and, my cell phone and email and all the technologies that we're using right now during COVID, I have found myself many periods over the last 7 months just really struggling with remote work. It used to be one of those things that I looked forward to as a treat. Like if I need to work from home, I can do that. If I have an appointment and I need to work with my schedule to kind of move around that, then I'll work from home in the morning, go to the appointment, maybe go into the office after that. But just the day in and day out has been really draining for me. So that was really affirming to see. And now I do know other people my age, millennials. One person in particular was commenting how he just absolutely loves working from home. He thinks it's great. But he's also a total introvert, you know. So I think a lot of that has to do with personality. Are you extroverted, introverted? Are you, more social than others? So there's different dynamics definitely at play there, from what I can tell. But really good point that you made. As well,
So Ben, just to break in for just a moment, I think what's so important about what you said is, right, there's the whole of your group, for which we gather statistics, and then within the group, an assessment says, well, I'm this part like that group, and I'm this part not like that group, which means if you're in Elaine or Annette's work, you've got to remember that despite the fact that we're wired to want to see people as groups, there's still a lot of huge individual variation in it.
Absolutely, yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely. I do want to comment as well, just from a professional standpoint. What's a good challenge to me from this presentation is I don't think it was a bullet point in one of your slides, but it was a point that you made, was to assume good intent of your colleagues from other generations. I have been very guilty of assuming bad intent often. There's a lot that you think is going on when communication isn't happening. And it's easy to assume that, for example, my colleague who is from the baby boomer generation thinks that I'm just, lazy or indecisive or what have you. But that can easily feed into your own misconceptions about that person from the other generation. So you have to be really careful. And for me, that's a good challenge, because I'm noticing that if I don't communicate regularly and often with folks on my team, especially folks that are of different generations, especially baby boomers, because I do want to call out just kind of this ongoing tension, it seems, between boomers and millennials, that I'm hoping to see the narrative around change and more communication happen. But it's really important to get, just certainty. Anything that's left kind of abstract or vague can really do damage in working relationships. So the more that you can talk to each other and understand each other, and where each other's gifts and skills are and what each other's expectations are, I think the better working relationship you're going to have. And for me, that's been really important and helpful. And it's helped me even disarm working relationships in the past that have been unfortunately toxic, with a person of the baby boomer generation who was very vocal about just kind of their opinions about millennials and thoughts, often negative opinions, I should say. But communication goes a long way in at least kind of helping establish somewhat of a decent rapport, even if the person you're working with is still fairly toxic. You can at least have some bridge to understanding, and at least make your work experience more productive and encouraging as well. So.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Ben kind of broke up people on our Zoom, but relations did intern, and he said he wanted to do it somewhere where they had coffee that didn't suck. So I think that's probably another consideration for certain of our populations. With that, thank you, Ben.
Of course, thank you.
Let me go to Annette, and how honored we are to have Annette join us, not only because of her years of experience in human resources, but also because she comes to us from State Farm, which has just been a fabulous supporter of our profit program and our nonprofit leadership alliance. And she also can give us a for-profit perspective on the workplace and the multi-generational workplace. So Annette, please, we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, John and Nancy. It was just so enriching to kind of listen to the broad breadth of information on this topic that you provided to everybody, and I so appreciate that. And thanks from a State Farm perspective. This kind of an event is just a perfect match with, and we have sort of 3 key areas we want to spend some of our philanthropic attention, and those are on education, which we have a wonderful partnership with Georgia State University. And the second of those is really working with the nonprofits in the community in which we serve. So this support with the Nonprofit Leadership Alliance, right? It's 2 of our top 3 items to kind of be engaged in and support. So appreciate the invitation to come and chat with the group today. Some of the things, so a few of these things that resonate with me. One is this idea of these generational differences in the workplace is really just one dimension of a very broad sort of diversity and inclusion theme and topic. And I'm very passionate about the diversity and inclusion efforts that any organization, I think, should and needs to have. It's just absolutely a business imperative to be able to leverage all of the unique skills and talents that come together in our workforce to make the best business decisions, the best problem solving that we can, so that ends up benefiting our customers or our clients. And we've got a really strong foundation in building those relationships. So there's been a lot of conversation about getting to know people is one of the best and most critical ways in which to try to help break down any biases or stereotypes that you have, and take people out of the group that they might or you might identify them with, and try to see a little bit more uniqueness in that. I'm a baby boomer by age label, but have always kind of wanted to be a Gen X wannabe. The things that were going on in that era, as Nancy had them on her chart, were sort of the things I remember from my formative years. Maybe with the exception of that one stereotype, I am always an optimist, glasses half full. And so the idea that I'm a skeptic as a maybe a Gen X wannabe would be, I'll bounce back to the boomer. But even that sort of dynamic in me perhaps even describes a bit of, right, not everybody fits cleanly or neatly into one bucket. And so I think that's something important and nice to try to remember. The comment that Nancy made a lot about the unconscious bias struck me a lot, and that need to try to help our employees understand what bias does to us in the workforce. And I'm a firm believer that, and Nancy might have said this, right? I think that at our very core, work-related like values and attitudes that we have across all 4 of the generations we're talking about today are really are not that different, right? She mentioned some. We all want to feel respected and valued for what our experiences and our knowledge can contribute to the organization. We all want feedback to help us grow. Nobody wants to do a bad job, and that doesn't feel good. We all want to grow and learn. We want to be able, like, we can trust our supervisor and trust our employer to do the things that they say they're going to do, and that there's transparency in what we're being shared. I think what is I think those are all the same, and what's different is how they are expressed. It varies with each of those generational lenses as it comes out. So having those conversations, seeking people out that might be different for you and can add different perspective would be really important. From a talent acquisition perspective, my current focus for State Farm, we're recognizing that as we're willing to all sort of admit and come to terms with the fact we all have biases, hopefully, right, unconscious biases and not the overt biases, but as Ben expressed, there can be some, his story, where there's some pretty overt, like, not being very favorable and talking about all the pessimistic bias perceptions of a generation can be really difficult to face. But from a talent acquisition perspective, I firmly believe, first, that I think any leader that has any hiring, promotion responsibility needs to have some basic diversity training and some unconscious bias training and awareness in that space. So we do that with any new leader, but I think the current societal conversations that are going on predominantly around race equity translate into any sort of inclusion topic or dimension of diversity. And this generational lens is certainly one of those. And so as much as I am extremely proud of the work State Farm has done with all of our internal diversity and inclusion support, training for employees, leaders, we're taking a look as a team and saying, okay, we're good. We have a plan for diversity and inclusion in our recruiting, but how can we continue to elevate and make it better and stronger? You know, one small example of what we're working to do today is realizing maybe we need to have a good refresher reminder about unbiased selection perspectives at the time of actual hiring with every leader. So I do it when you're a new employee, but maybe you haven't had to hire somebody in a year or two. And so we're adding into our sort of hiring manager intake conversation for every opening we have, a reminder about biases in potential, risk of biases and risk selection. I think once we can remove this lens of age perceptions or biases, really gives us the potential to shift our focus to what do candidates bring to us in their abilities, their skill, their knowledge, not necessarily what they look like or what generation they come from. And that's going to be a huge benefit, obviously, to the candidates, right? Looking at the right things that they present to us. But as a recruitment tool, that's going to just expand our pool and the opportunity for any hiring manager to really look at this much more broadly and get the right person for their job. One other quick thing I'll comment and then pause. I know we want to get to some questions. We've talked a lot about ways to try to learn about each other and maybe generational differences. If you're in an organization, mentoring is one great opportunity. And we have some formal and lots of informal mentoring programs within our organization. If you join an organization, another thing you might want to ask or look into is, do they have any employee resource groups? So again, in support of broad dimensions of diversity and inclusion, we've actually got 12 employee resource groups at State Farm. 2 of those really focus on generations in the workplace. And we have one that's called My Generation, My Gen, and really helping that group's focus is on employees navigating the different issues that come at every different age and stage, whether that's the career development and progression, that's very different at different stages and ages for you. Networking with people, the ideas of childcare, elder care, depending on what generation, and there's a generation that's sandwiched between those two and maybe dealing with both of those challenges. And financial planning, whether you're just starting out and trying to start figuring out how to save for retirement, or whether you're a boomer and you're trying to figure out, have I saved enough, and can I really make this next move to retirement? And then our second one is called Young Business Professionals, focusing on how do we help support those that are new to that profession and balancing and blending their educational and learning opportunities along with other generational groups that have been through where they are and can provide some support in learning, that cross-functional learning that Nancy was mentioning comes with the mentoring program, mutual learning. So I'll pause there. Throw it back to you, John. have we lost John, or is it me that?
There's a small possibility that it's John.
I'm glad somebody responded and it wasn't. That's good.
So, Amber, how about while we're waiting for John, there is a question that came up in the chat.
Yeah,
that I can go ahead and address.
Yeah.
So first of all, let me again say, Elaine, Ben, and Annette, I appreciate your comments. And I do think this is a really, a place for some really rich consideration, because it will, if we learn to do this part well, we will learn to do the rest of diversity and inclusion well. And this is a good place for us to get some practice, and maybe that's what it is. But somebody wrote in the chat that they wanted to know, as a millennial, how do they come alongside and encourage and advocate for the boomer generation colleagues they know who have lost their jobs or been denied job opportunities because of implicit ageism in the workplace? I think the best way to handle that is the same way we would handle any concern from any employee about anything. So when a person is feeling that they have been discriminated against because of age, it's not any different than feeling discriminated against about anything. And of course, if you are in areas of responsibility, you can see about getting those situations changed. But I think what happens here is, how do I handle it on an in-person level? The same way I would handle any hardship for an employee. So it's listening to the person talk, clarifying what they're thinking, asking them if they are in the place to figure out some strategies to deal with it. So if we revert back to that GROW model, of course, first, people often in a hard situation don't want a solution. They want to just talk about it. And we need to be good listeners, active listeners in that place. But then I think there's a place where you start saying, so if that's a fact, what's your goal? What are some of the realities that we can look at, both plus and minus? What are some options you might consider as you move forward? And then what's the first one or two things you want to do? That at least helps a person, when they're ready to move to action, figure out what to do. Does that answer the question?
Yes, Nancy, thank you. That was my question, actually, and appreciate you breaking that down. It was really helpful.
So now we have a question that says, how do we bridge the gap to make work as an institution more accessible for the younger generation, who often can accomplish more in a shorter amount of time if given flexibility in work arrangements? I think that gets back to the communication question. And Elaine, you may have some comments on this. How about I let you just go next? So.
Sure. Yeah, I was going to say, you know, the communication piece, I think, is key. I'm always a huge fan, and I think you mentioned it too, Nancy, in your presentation, but ensuring that you have multiple modes of communication. Not everyone is great on email, and not everybody is a great conversationalist, or maybe they don't present as well. So really just thinking through, do you have strategies to deliver a message in person? And do you have strategies to deliver it in writing? Do you have strategies to deliver it in a variety of different ways? I mean, and then thinking through the ways that adult learners learn, and how some people are more auditory and some people are more verbal. And so just thinking through those in terms of bridging the gap, but also looking at individual people, because you can't just assume that everyone in a certain age group is going to be great or want an email. In fact, I can tell you, in my case, I get hundreds of email all day. And so an email might be one more thing on my plate, versus if you called me, I actually would probably enjoy that, because it gets a little bit of a breakup in my time. And and even now, since I'm working from home, and my team's primarily working at home, and we're using Zoom for, you know, our meetings, I've actually encouraged them just to just to call me on Zoom just randomly, because I would have, folks to stop by my office, and those many sort of workday interruptions that they would just stop by my door and ask a quick question don't necessarily happen in the virtual space. But I more than welcome them in the virtual space. So I think we have to think differently and creatively about using the tools that we have. We can set up a webinar, we can set up a Zoom that's a formal meeting, and that's great, and we can use that for collaboration. But what about those things where you just had that quick stand-up meeting, or you just wanted to ask a quick question and pop your head in someone's office? How do we do that in a virtual space that feels organic and not forced? And I think that's where we are as a workplace, and how we need to create and think of those things through. And, some of our tools will allow us to do that, but there's also FaceTime, there's also text, there's also some of the things that we use with our family members that allow us to do that. And I just think we have to get a little bit more creative when we're using those strategies. But that's at least one way that might help bridge the gap, is kind of take that formality out of it and make it a little bit informal to help bridge the gap, because we're all sort of going through this together.
Well, one of the things I'd add to that, Elaine, is getting back to this statement about good intent, is we're trying out a lot of different strategies. When the first couple of weeks we all got on Zoom, we just thought it was fantastic. And now we're like, oh, I cannot be on Zoom meetings all day long. They're too exhausting, right? But we are not used to communicating our thought process as we go into a new way of doing things. So it may be that I want you to ping me during the day, and I just say that, but I don't necessarily say, I'm concerned that we're not having the same kind of drop-in. I'm concerned you're not bringing me something until it's a bigger deal. So in order to meet my concern, I want to talk to you about your concerns, and then I want to suggest we try this out and see if it accomplishes what we want or not. We're so used to just like planning into the next piece, and then by next week we think that didn't work and we're going to try something else. But it's not necessarily true that the people that we're working with have any idea what our intention is, intention behind all of that. It's interesting, we've had a couple of questions that have come up about that really in many ways point to the very stereotypes we were talking about, right? This idea of younger people can do things faster. Okay, that could have gone on my chart as to, this is a stereotype, that boomers are slower than some other generation, right? I think oftentimes we are attributing things to a group we belong to when we're really trying to solve a problem for ourselves. So the question is, if I work faster by myself, back to Ben's earlier statement, if I'm not a collaborator, if I just want to get my assignments done and move on, then I'm trying to figure out how to be successful doing that in a workplace that may have other expectations of me. And how do I learn to dialogue what it is I need to be successful, and how do I need to mediate what I'm wanting in order to meet the needs of other people in the group. There's also a question here that talks about how are we going to stay with alternative work arrangements post-COVID, with the implication here that boomer bosses are going to be anxious to get us all back in the workplace. I do think I'm seeing that. I know that I'm seeing that from some of the senior leaders that I'm working with, that they are tired of accommodating all these things, and they would just like to get everybody back in the workplace where they feel like they're only dealing with work. But again, what the data is showing us is folks like Ben want to have a couple days of working remote, or want to be able to go do something and then go home. They want choices, but they still want the camaraderie and collaboration of being in a workplace, where many boomers are finding, gosh, now that I've made this adaptation, I'd be perfectly happy primarily having a remote workplace. So I think we still have a lot to learn, and goodness knows, it looks like we'll have many more months to figure it out.
Very good. I don't know if everybody can everybody see the chat?
Yep.
Yeah, we just had a couple a question from Teresa that just was popped up about age discrimination toward young people. One thing I noticed was that they saw young people as their children and talked to them like parents and children. And then I think we had another question that might have been sent in advance, or maybe it was earlier, and maybe you addressed it because I cut out a little bit. Then they were talking about age discrimination against older people. So everybody's worried about being discriminated against here, it seems.
Well, I would say when I read that, it is true, and we do think that that's some of the reason that that ageism bias exists. Because we have, and what are we going to do? I mean, we have parents, we are kids. I mean, this is part of the world, right? But there is a sense on both sides of the equation. This person, I am a young leader. I have somebody who is of the boomer generation or Xer generation that's working for me. They don't have the kind of respect for me that they ought to have. Or the reverse, this person is like my kids, and I don't like when my kids do this, and I don't like it when they do this. This is all the stuff, Annette, that you were speaking about in terms of paying attention to what is this unconscious bias I have towards people that are older or younger. And then once recognized, what am I going to do to look at you as an individual as opposed to a representation of some sort of my family unit? So.
Yeah, these are these kinds of questions right at the core heart of my HR world just make me a little sad, make me cringe a little bit, but there's ways to make it better. It does exist. And if there's good intention, to the majority of these kinds of situations we see here and are being asked, the odds are it's an unconscious bias. If we think good intent, there are going to be examples where it's pretty overt. You know, and we've had a lot of conversation about communication and the value of making sure that we know what the R in grow, the reality is as we're moving forward instead of assumptions. Something that I love to share with people and have found personal success with is if anybody's heard of the book and the theories around crucial conversations. Mm-hmm. It's multiple authors. One of them is Patterson. I can't remember the others, but there's a series of books, but at the core, crucial conversations. And I would say probably mid-career for me, I had this opportunity to go through not only the book and the reading for myself, but sort of a training session with a team of other leaders I was a part of. And we were struggling. And we just said, first of all, let's call it out. We had to be brave enough to sort of say, oh, we're not doing as well as we could be doing. And we went through this process. And I have just leveraged so many of the tips that I learned from that book in how to approach a sensitive conversation. And it could be super crucial conversation. Things related to inclusion, generational differences can be one of those. And it could be a simple conversation where I just need to double check, I didn't misunderstood what you said. And so it approaches those conversations from the perspective of, what am I feeling and thinking? What am I maybe doing that could be done a little bit differently for you and I to have a better understanding, better communication, as opposed to approaching, what are you doing that's driving me crazy, right? Sort of a thing. And it takes just a slightly different way to go into some of those conversations and manage the emotions that come along with some of those conversations. So you got to be prepared for that, to really create a safe space for two people or a team of people to sort of talk through what could make things better. And if, as a boomer, if I'm talking to somebody and making them feel like they're my child, oh my goodness, last thing I really want. And so tell me that and tell me what I sound like so that I can figure out what to do differently and just simply respect you as one of my peers in the workplace. So I might just offer that tip. I love crucial conversations.
Well, and I was going to say, and for the diversity of learners here, one, it's a must-have book. You're absolutely right, Annette. There is also, if you get onto your search engine, some great videos and YouTube talks on crucial conversations, so you can pick it up in audio or video or in a summary, or it makes a great book study for a group of people getting together and learning how to get stronger.
Very good. I'm sorry, you may have addressed this when I cut out a little bit, but Annette mentioned it before, and that is in looking at hiring now and talent acquisition, what things do we particularly want to pay attention to? And that assumes that we're not just hiring young people, if you would. It assumes we're hiring people across the board. So what things are critical to pay attention to in today's environment regarding talent acquisition?
Was that to me, John, I think?
Yeah, I think you can start us off. I would think everybody might have a comment, but
Would love the perspectives on that. By all means, not a great time to have to be in the job market, right? With the state of our unemployment and where we're going. I think some of the fundamentals are still grounded in an employment time like this than anywhere else. How are you best presenting your skills and abilities and experience to the roles that you're looking for? And in a tough economic and in a tough employment time, also just great advice of think a little broadly or differently. You might have come out of school thinking this is the kind of career or the kind of job that I really am targeting and wanting to go for. Start thinking about your skills and abilities in a broader transferable way to say, what other roles, if I need to for now, look at that might be a great match for what I can offer and bring to an organization. So that would be one piece of suggestion. And I'm always very open. If you could find a mentor or a colleague that's willing to kind of take a look at how am I presenting my resume, if you will, what I bring to the table, and how does that compare to maybe other contemporary ways that's being done? There are all kinds of very interesting technology platforms that companies are using for their applicant tracking systems. Getting a little bit of insight and knowing how those tools might be using, getting comfortable with what an online application process or what systems might be looking for as keywords in resumes. Doing a little research, learning about that, if that's not something that you've perhaps explored, could help you with that very entry-level step that is really all automated and sometimes not personal touch these days for at least larger organizations that have some of these tools, to understand how they work and therefore how do you best have yourself be represented in those early stages of an online application process.
thank you, Annette.
Other thoughts, yeah.
Elaine or Nancy or Ben, any thoughts on that? On the talent acquisition piece?
I think Annette hit it on the head. I mean, I think just, expanding what your idea and role might be in an organization and looking for that. We often talk about a career lattice at Goodwill. And so not necessarily moving up in a vertical manner, but maybe moving across. And that's been true for a lot of our leaders who were at, definitely our senior leaders who were at the organization. They've held many seats on the bus. And so I think that that's definitely one of the things that you can look at. And then also too, I firmly believe that after COVID, whenever that happens, that, the world of work is going to be changed. And there's a lot of studies that, suggest 5 years from now, many of the jobs that we have today are no longer going to be in place. And there's going to be a new crop of jobs that are totally different than what we think they are today. And so I would say, you know, not necessarily get stressed out about it, but thinking through, you know, what skills, and just going back to what Annette said, really thinking about what skills you have, what things you have to offer, and really what you want to do in the world of work. Because whether your job title says this today, it could be totally different tomorrow. That particular job may not even exist. So I think that's one of the ways that you can really sort of take a little weight off your shoulders and thinking through, here's what I can bring value to an organization, here's where my value is to the organization, and here's what I'd like from the organization, and then try to align those two things, and then figure out, you know, the actual job title and things later. But I think that everyone, even employers and organizations, are really going to have to a little bit differently post COVID and post the social reckoning that we're going through as a world, to how, you know, we bring talent on, and what positions that they hold today, and what that means for the future of work.
So I will add, I have been using this book with colleagues, clients, friends. It's called The 2-Hour Job Search. And it is a great resource, I think, in terms of getting you to frame up your search. It talks, Annette, to your point, the whole job process is so automated today that networking is critical, and knowing you have advocates within an organization that can help you make your way through the process is really important. I often suggest to people, which both Elaine and Annette were speaking about, is look at the phrases, go out onto Indeed and look at jobs you're interested in, and figure out what words you need to have in your resume and in your talking points, and also go through the list of job expectations and pretend you were being interviewed on every one of those statements, and know how you would give a concrete example of something you have done. We live in a world where people are buying talent. They are not doing a lot in terms of making talent. Maybe some of that's different, and that talked a lot about their training programs. Certainly Goodwill's known for that, but most companies are buying talent for the job that is posted, not the job you want 3 steps after that job, for the job that is posted. And they want to know that you're going to make their life easier if you come in and take this job. And so books like this 2-Hour Job Search, or people practicing with you, can help you. Because what I find is, in hard times like this, people want to come in and interview and talk to you about the difficulty they're having. And the person who's hiring you wants to know their life is going to be less difficult because they brought you on board.
Excellent point, Nancy. There was a question. Did you see the question in the chat from Bristol? Any comments about that? Any aha moments you can reference in terms of a breakthrough across generations?
Well, I certainly can. I was thinking maybe Ben was going to jump in and tell me the great example he had, but then I remembered he talked about the example that went bad. So I would say I have many examples where what has happened is I have been in this co-learning kind of situation that Annette is talking about. I do think it's probably true that I often think of colleagues that are the age of my children, that I think of them as being in similar experiences, but it's not that I don't respect their work environment, or I don't respect the work they're doing, or I don't see them as a colleague. It's just in those social interactions that Elaine was talking about, I find us talking about the childcare issues they're having that mirror the childcare issues that my grown children are having. And in many cases, that's made for a better relationship. I think in most cases, it's made for a better relationship because I am somebody they can talk to that has some different experiences. What's important is those experiences add to the fact that we are good colleagues working through an issue. And I don't think I have some sort of age diminishment of power or age advance of power because I'm in a different generation.
Thank you, Nancy. All right, we're approaching toward the end of our time. Were we able to get through all of the questions on the chat? Are there any outstanding questions that we've not addressed from any of our wonderful attendees?
There's a question that just came through from Samar.
Yes. If we can all look at that. It's the old question about I never hear back. I reach out and the person goes silence on me. How do you keep that relationship? I think as a person who raised funds for a living, I had to deal with that every day.
I would be curious to hear a little bit about the circumstance under which the person is not replying. I do think Elaine brought up the multitude of emails that come into her email box today. So part of that good intent is recognizing how busy people are. The question is, how to me, part of the question is, how do you gain reasonable expectations of hearing from somebody?
Yeah, if I may add one thing, one of the techniques I used in fundraising is I would never leave a conversation without asking permission for when I could get back in touch. So I would simply say, thank you for this time that we spent. May I follow up with you in a couple of weeks if I haven't heard back from you? And so then when I follow up, I simply say, Nancy, I'm giving you a call back as we agreed upon before. So the old thing is that you keep the ball in your court, so the next move is yours. Now, that doesn't mean the person's going to respond to you, but it gives you the opportunity to continue to kind of reach out without seeming to be a quote-unquote pest.
I might just add quickly, John, I think that's a great tip. I think managing your expectation of what you're expecting from the networking relationship. And so networking can have a lot of different definitions or expectations. Typically, I find the best ones are where there is a reciprocity of what you both might be able to get from the relationship. So if you maybe a less than positive example I'm just networking and reaching out because I think you might be somebody who can get me the job, and I don't know you, and all I'm asking for is a job, right? Then I've got a bunch of other people perhaps seeking and interested in the same job, and I'll be happy to chat and look, but that doesn't mean that all of a sudden I'm going to build this professional relationship with you. Again, we need some context behind maybe the full scope, but networking, what can you offer? So think about that as an additional tip when you reach out to somebody who you think might be a great networking for you professionally. Think of what you might be able to offer them as well at the same time.
And again, referring back to this book I talked about, it does give John some concrete steps to exactly what you talked about how to set up for the follow-up and how to have the give and get, because what it says is you're going to want to create a network. The challenge is you need to be creating your network when there is not a high need, so that you have a network for which you have credits in at the time you need the network. And this is challenging for people to do. But the most important thing you can do to make your career successful, besides doing a great job, is to have a strong network.
Very good. Very good. Well, we're approaching the end of our time, and before I turn this over to Amber, I see there are several questions from some of our students about the Nonprofit Leadership Alliance, how to join that, how to get that, how to get connected to it. I'll ask you to approach those in just a minute, but what I want to do is give a sincere thanks to Nancy as our presenter, to Elaine, Annette, and Ben as our panelists. You have done this in a volunteer capacity, given all the Zoom meetings in your life and everything else going on in your life. And I think it indicates the commitment that you have, not only to your organizations, but to your career and to your fellow persons. So thank you so much for this time. We just can't thank you enough. And I'm so appreciative. And with that, Amber, let me turn that over to you for some closing remarks and particularly how some of our students, I think particularly our Decatur campus students, can get connected to the Nonprofit Leadership Alliance. Thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you, John. I appreciate that. Just as a reminder, my name's Amber Slider. I'm the campus director for the Nonprofit Leadership Alliance at Georgia State, and I'm also the academic specialist for the Public Management and Policy Department. Thank you all once again for coming today, for joining us in this discussion. I hope that we were able to cover some things that you've been wondering about, that you've been experiencing, and also answer some of your questions. Thank you again, as John said, to our panelists and to our keynote for responding to all of those questions and for giving us some greater insight into the real world of how this is all working out. For our students that have joined us today, if you are interested in joining the Nonprofit Leadership Alliance, you can definitely check us out on our website. On Georgia State University's website, there is a Nonprofit Leadership Alliance webpage, and it'll give you further instructions about how to join us and what's coming up next. We actually have a general body meeting virtual coming up on November 3rd that we'd love to have you at. And I can also give further information about the CNP process. I'll drop my email into the chat, so that way if anyone has any further questions, they can send it to me directly and I can get you contacted. And for our nonprofit professionals that have joined us today, thank you for your support of NLA, for coming to these things. We're still not quite sure what spring is going to look like, but we'll definitely keep you posted on any future events and things that you can join us with, and maybe even present if you're interested. But I know all of you have a very busy Friday to get back to, so I just want to say thank you once again, and I hope that you all have a wonderful day.
The general body meeting is on November 4th. I think you're going to vote on November 3rd. Our general body meeting is on November 4th at 3 p.m. And we are actually having a presentation by one of the local foundation executives, what's happening in the with the COVID environment and grants. So again, thank you all so much. As Amber said, enjoy the rest of your Friday. Students, let us hear from you. We need you to plan your career, and no better way to plan it than joining the Nonprofit Leadership Alliance. And we couldn't have the Nonprofit Leadership Alliance if it wasn't for support from organizations like State Farm. Thank you, Annette. Please carry that back to all your folks.
I will. Thank you. We enjoy it too.
All right. Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.